Hey, thanks for joining us. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the publisher at Orion. Really appreciate you all being here. For those who don't know Orion, we're a nonprofit organization that publishes a quarterly print magazine and original online content. We tell stories at the intersection of nature and culture, aiming to invite readers into a community of caring for the planet. We're here today to celebrate the publication of our beautiful summer issue, whose theme, The Future is Fungi, explores the mysteries and marvels of the mighty mushroom, how it connects our world and us in ways we still don't fully understand. The issue features stories by two of today's guests, as well as contributions from Maria Popova, Merlin Sheldrake, Jeff Vandermeer, and Lydia Yuknovich. Our event partner today is the Food and Environmental Reporting Network, or FERN. You can find them at thefern.org, an independent nonprofit news organization that produces award-winning journalism on food, agriculture, and environmental health. FERN seeks to make the food system more sustainable and equitable by partnering with other national and regional media outlets on powerful journalism and multimedia storytelling. Both Orion and FERN are telling urgent stories these days, timely stories about climate, nature, food, and culture, stories that need to be told at a time when climate journalism and environmental storytelling are at risk, facing federal cuts and other setbacks. So we are proud to partner with FERN on one of the stories featured in our summer issue, written by one of today's guests. So let me jump to our intros and get our guests started and chatting. Meera Subramanian is an award-winning journalist who writes a narrative nonfiction about home and place in a time of climate crisis. Her work has appeared in Nature, The New York Times, TheNewYorker.com, and Orion. She's the author of A River Runs Again, India's Natural World in Crisis, and she teaches at creative nonfiction at Sewanee School of Letters in Tennessee. She's been a Knight Science Journalism Fellow at MIT, a Fulbright Nehru Science Senior Research Fellow, board president of the Society of Environmental Journalists, and the Curry C. and Thomas A. Barron Visiting Professor in the Environment and the Humanities at Princeton. She's currently a Frontiers Science Journalism Fellow in residency at the Basque Center for Climate Change in Bilbao, but her home is in the U.S. on a glacial moraine on the edge of the Atlantic. Erica Berry, her nonfiction debut, Wolfish, Wolf, Self, and the Stories We Tell About Fear, published in early 2023, won the 2024 Oregon Book Award and was a semifinalist for the Pacific Northwest Book Award. Her second book, Bodies in Heat, Love in a Changing Climate, is forthcoming. Her essays appear in the New York Times, the Yale Review, the Guardian, Emergence, Literary Hub, Outside, and Orion. A former National Writer Series writer in residence, she's taught at the Orion Writers Workshop and other places, and she's the forthcoming visiting distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. She lives in her hometown of Portland. Theodore Ross is editor-in-chief of the Food and Environmental Reporting Network. He was a supervising producer for the films Patriot Act on Netflix and Game Theory on HBO. He was executive director of The New Republic and an editor of Harper's Magazine and Men's Journal. Stories he's edited have won multiple awards. His own writing has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Harper's, The New Republic, The Atlantic, Vice, Business Week, and others. He's the author of Am I a Jew?, a memoir published by Penguin in 2012. He lives in Brooklyn. All right, I'm talking quickly to kind of get as fast as I can to the main event. So, quick housekeeping. Theodore will be in conversation with Meera and Erica. We'll save time at the end for Q&A. If you have a question, put it in the Zoom Q&A function, not the chat. The whole event will be recorded. We'll send you a link afterwards. Along the way, I'll drop a few links into the chat, including how to find Orion and FERN and our guests, and I'll drop a subscription code for a 20% off one-year subscription to Orion. Hope you enjoy this. Thanks for joining us. If you like what you see, please consider supporting Orion and the FERN. Stay hydrated. Happy to turn things now over to Theodore, Meera, and Erica.
All right, great. Let's jump in. Why don't we? I think right before we get started, I just want to say thank you for having me here and giving me this opportunity to talk to you, Meera and Erica. Your pieces are both wonderful and important and beautifully written, and we'll have a great conversation about it. I want to mention, as part of what FERN does, we partnered with Orion on this issue. We worked with Meera's piece, and so we are a both participant and supporter of what Orion is doing. So I just wanted to put that out there. Why don't we start with this? I think for those of you, I assume most of you are here have some idea what Meera and Erica wrote about, but I'd like each of you to just tell the story of your story just to start out. And in no particular order, I'm going to say, Meera, you go first.
Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you. It's so great to be here, and it was so great to have the support of both Orion and Fern to make this story happen because it involved reporting and getting out in the field. I wanted to write about fungi in relation to climate, which is something I'm thinking about a lot these days, and just what lessons they might have to teach us in a warming world. And so I think of mushrooms, and I'm on the East Coast now, but I spent a chunk of time out in Oregon, and that's where I fell in love with mushrooms and finding them out in the woods. And so I felt like I needed to go back to Oregon for this story. And so I went at the end of October, which is like should be prime mushroom season. I went bookended on two mushroom festivals, and I talked to tons of people and ended up focusing on a story that really zeroed in on just a few of those people and um, trying to gather the lessons of what mushrooms were teaching us because they were seeing huge changes between droughts, such as the mushrooms that weren't coming because it wasn't raining when it was supposed to be raining, fires, heat domes. I was hearing about the impacts from those and came up with a few lessons, which maybe I'll just hold on for the rest of our conversation.
Sounds good. And Erica, your turn. What was your story about?
So my story was loosely, first of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Orion and Theodore, for this. This is a little snapshot of the reporting background that this story took place in, which was in the Coast Range, also in Oregon, where I went foraging with a source, Alana Hagens, in January. We were looking for some of the winter mushrooms. And I was going in trying to write about mushrooms in the context of food and fear. I'd previously written this book thinking about fear on a very philosophical level, as well as wolves. And in conversation with the great Orion editor Tara, we'd come up against the idea that a mushroom could be kind of like a wolf. Like it was this thing that a lot of people, or we, were kind of culturally obsessed with, but also could not understand. It's hard to tame. We cannot easily like wrap our reins around this being, and this being is acting independent of us. There's also a real tendency to project either like threat onto this being or panacea. This thing can save our wounded world. And I was interested in sort of those tensions between like the known and the unknown. So pretty quickly, though, I was also living a version of my life while I was doing this reporting, which was thinking about the terror of the unknown of falling in love and picking a partner. And I was thinking about this sort of past traumatic foraging experience I'd had. No mushrooms were eaten in the process, but I can go into that later. It was with wild chard in Italy. And I'd had that we thought was wild chard. It was actually mandrake, known for putting Romeo and Juliet in a coma. And so I had this past experience of foraging near death in my life. And I also had recently fallen in love and was living with a new partner and was experiencing a lot of flashbacks to a previous partner who had lied and betrayed me. And I was thinking about the fact that going out and picking now fungi in this forest and choosing to consume it was choosing to believe in myself and my own sensors and capacity to keep myself safe. And that felt very similar actually to falling in love. Like I was thinking in a sort of general way that I wanted to pursue pleasure without dwelling on the possibility of pain. And I felt like actually foraging for mushrooms and thinking about mushrooms could help me in these sort of larger contexts. So my work is often essayistic and associative, and thinking into the role of the mushroom as a sort of figure of fear and also panacea helped me think about the relation of love and sort of self trust in the face of the unknown in larger contexts.
Okay, so I want to talk about the ways in which I think there's a certain thing that your both of your stories sort of share, right? I mean, obviously these are very different stories. Meera's is, looking at the world of mushrooms after natural disaster, and yours is this ruminative essay about fear and mushrooms, a near-death experience with wild foods. But what I think they share, and I'd like you two both to feel free to disagree with me about this, is that there's a note of optimism in both of them. And in Meera's, I think what I found optimistic, even in this, fairly conventional notion of climate difficulty, climate disaster, climate apocalypse, the ability of mushrooms to find ways to adapt and move forward yes, I know we're not mushrooms and we may have problems with the environment going forward, but I felt there was a takeaway there that hinted at a note of optimism. And I think, Erica, while yours is operating in this environment of fear and our associations with mushrooms as risky to eat, uh, the romantic story is optimistic, and also the ways in which you find community among other people who go looking for mushrooms. So I want you two to talk about that, and maybe this is unintentional, maybe it was intentional, maybe you don't agree. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I definitely grappled with that. Like I think I grappled with that tension in all of my stories of like really just like looking for people who are trying to make a world that increasingly feels broken and sometimes irreparable ways. But there's still all these amazing people who are coming together and forming communities and looking for life and trying to find lessons from the natural world that can help us figure out how to get through this. So that's nice that that came across. There were definitely times as I was out there where it felt kind of dire. I mean, one guy I talked to, Ron Hamill, has been like working for 30 years in the forest, often on government contracts out there, looking for fungi and identifying different plants. And just in his 30 years of working, which is a very short amount of time, in the grand scheme of things, he has seen ecosystems completely transform from heat and watching mushrooms kind of flourish and then just disappear, and that he feels that is partly related to a changing climate. So there were times when it felt kind of dire, but also like it when as soon as you mushrooms are so wild. They're right, Erica, like this is just it's just was such a fun story to report because we as reporters and writers, we just throw ourselves and read and listen and are studying everything like peer-reviewed stuff. And I end up quoting from Irene Solá, this beautiful novel that has like a whole chapter that's written from the vantage of mushrooms. And so we were, I'm sure Eric the same, like swimming in fungi, and they are so fascinating, and they just break down everything we know about taxonomy and division, and they're in us, they're everywhere. I open up the story with like a catastrophic fire has happened in Santa Cruz, and a whole redwood forest, like a state park, has burned, 97% burned. And Christian Schwartz, who's the mycologist that I open with, he is looking for these, like this place that's been decimated beyond recognition, and then all these mushrooms like appear in like literally when the fire is still burning. There's mushrooms appearing that he has never seen. He's never seen before, and he knows all these mushrooms. He knows this place like the back of his hand, and so like that surprise and wonder, like that's where I find like the optimism is like
Yeah.
we kind of don't even know what's going on yet, and systems recover, and we have like so much that we can learn about adapting and being embracing diversity, and just really recognizing that everything is way more complex and way more intertwined than we think of in our human bodies that we think like begin and end here.
And what
Yeah.
about
You have
you, Erica? I mean, yours is more about it's hard to say it's optimistic in taking the risk of eating a food item that might kill you. So how do you feel you fit into that conversation?
No, I mean, I totally see that what everything Mira's talking about echoes. And Mira, there's a line in yours where you say like maybe one of the lessons of mushrooms is to see something different than us and lean in, not lean away. And the ways that mushrooms are sort of like in everything, and there's all these very like collaborative symbioses, right?
Yeah.
And I think when I think about fear, I think there's a lesson in that too, and discomfort. And like it reminds me of, again, research I was doing with wolves, where like wolves are afraid, but when they're afraid of something, they go towards it, they investigate it. And like we think of this sort of impulse towards the terror of our future as being one of like shrinking away and going inside our little, computer boxes and hiding. And in fact, I think what the mushrooms and wolves and much of the natural world can teach us is like, what if we are sort of going out and investigating and witnessing, and like there's a pleasure in just seeing. And for me, so much of the experience of looking for mushrooms, I thought that the optimism would be like, look I found a safe chanterelle, I ate it, now I have succeeded at feeding myself something that will not kill me from the wild. And in fact, the pleasure was in like witnessing hoarfrost and the mycological sort of like creations that were everywhere that I had not let myself see. And this is sort of a tangent, but Helen Garner, the Australian writer, has a beautiful essay where she talks about like the purpose of finding happiness. She's in her 80s and she's like, we can't find happiness. That's like elusive to look for. We can find extreme stabs of interestingness, I think is how she put it. It's in The Guardian. And for me, beginning to look at the world as a mushroom hunter might, or to think about how to look at the world as a mushroom might, was to like populate my world with extreme interestingness, which is not in itself hope, but it feels a little bit like that. And in the context of falling in love, like I think I love eating and I love connecting with people. And both of those things carry a threat. And one of the things that my main source, Alon, said is she said, I didn't learn foraging, academically. Many foragers learn because they're in community with naturalists, and they're meeting people at farmers markets and on foraging groups. And she said the best mushroom foragers are sometimes just the people in the best community. And that to me is also made me think of my near-death experience where we had been quite isolated. It was a group of expats living in Sicily at the time when we were foraging for a plant that we did not understand. This was not our ecosystem that we knew. And that was part of why we were harmed, was because we had been in isolation. And so, in fact, connection, even though there's a risk in it, keeps you safe. And I think the sort of darker side of that was that after we had our near-death mandrake experience, an older man in Italy had died, or in Sicily near us, at the hospital sort of reported, you weren't the only ones that had this experience in early spring. There's this other guy. And what was horrifying about that was that he was an Italian. He spoke the language. This was his homeland, but he was living disconnected from this knowledge. Like there was not a sort of known language around how to identify these plants. And so I guess it makes me think about hope as like being in connection, not just with each other, but also with the rhythms of the landscapes that we are foraging or walking in. And the Facebook groups that I ended up writing about are people, strangers, coming together to try to identify the safety of mushrooms and then also the safety of people they're dating. And I was sort of cringy about both of these groups, as I sometimes am skeptical of online forums because I prefer real life forums and think it can devolve quickly. But I was interested in the ways that I think people right now are really hungry for connection, and we don't know how to do that mycelial reaching across difference. And so in a way, these groups can feel a bit surface level or sort of internet, little ping pong on the internet. But in fact, I think there was an impulse of protecting each other in a way that is really how humans have been, say, eating mushrooms for many thousands of years, has been in conversation with other humans before we do that.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk just more generally about the issue Orion and also the mushroom. And I don't think it's an accident. Obviously, it's not an accident, but I think it is a smart idea that Orion decided to do a full issue of its magazine on the mushroom, because I think the mushroom, if you'll forgive me for this, is having sort of a moment. People are interested in mushrooms. They care about it. They're thinking about it. And it's in a lot of ways. I mean, from the gastronomic to the psychedelic, people are interested. So I'm curious if you two, have thoughts about that. Why are people interested in mushrooms beyond yourself? And also, why did you come to this particular subject?
Meera, I'm curious for your mushroom hook.
Yeah, I mean, I think no, you go first. You go first. I want to hear.
Well, I was going to say originally when this piece was sort of in discussion with me, the frame was like, why don't you only eat mushrooms for a week and write about what happens? And it's going to be like gonzo journalism of you just subsuming yourself in mushrooms. And then it became like, absorb mushrooms in any way possible. So I found a mushroom perfume. There's mushroom fake leather with Stella McCartney. There's mushroom coffee that you blend up every morning, and pills. And I just started, with the help of the wonderful Sumanth, a former editor-in-chief of Orion, like getting free samples of mushroom products sent to me. And what became very clear was that mushrooms and capitalism have connected in a way where everything is mushroom. And I found it on my Instagram feed, especially where there's so much of social media is like, sell this, here's the problem for you culturally, and here's the way to solve it. And mushrooms were sort of like being, they were this sort of silver bullet or golden milk panacea of like all the problems. You will be healthier, stronger, better, smarter if you have mushrooms. I didn't end up eating mushrooms just for a week. I did sort of spray myself with this very dirt flavored mushroom perfume before I went foraging. I still like it. It's Demeter for anyone who's interested. But I do think that there's a way that the mushroom has sort of like become shorthand for a kind of connectivity with interconnection, which is kind of, I mean, I'm thinking like, what does a pin mean if I see a mushroom apparel? You know, it's a popular print, and I feel like it's sort of a shorthand that like you're in touch with the woods, you're in touch with sort of folklore or fairy or older ways of being. You know, the mushroom is not AI, even though there's something sort of AI like about mushrooms communicating in ways we cannot understand. You know, like I feel like it's this sort of symbol of the oldest stories we know. The toadstool I associate with fairy tales, right? It's like there's a nostalgia in the mushroom, and also there's like a future optimism in the mushroom because it can eat plastic, and you know, you can build fake leather out of it, and like the mushroom is both the future and the past, and we are discontent in the present.
Before we get Meera, before you have a chance to answer, what were you gonna eat for a week?
Well, I kept asking, I was like, can I cook the mushrooms in olive oil and butter, or do they have to be just like raw? Like, can I use salt? Can I use different seasoning? And I talked to my partner about it and was like, I might be doing this thing. Are you on board? Like, and he was just like, I think you're going to get sick on like day 3. Like, how are you know? And so I still kind of want to do this, but maybe for like 24 hours.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that answer. Meera, what do you think? Why are you interested in mushrooms? Why are the people here today? They could probably speak for themselves too, but why are mushrooms, why do mushrooms matter?
Yeah, okay. So I totally echo everything that Erica said in terms of the past and the future. I part of me though is a little bit allergic to like that panacea part. I think both of us were really wary of that. And I know talking with Taja was stepping in as the editor when I was working on the story, Taja, and that was like I was just like I want to address that they can be, but like I've written stories about plastics, including for Orion, and having a mushroom that eats plastic is not even remotely part of solving the plastics problem. So like making sure that we're like cognizant of the limitations of mushroom of what mushrooms can do and recognizing that. And I've also like I've written a lot about birds, and I kind of was cautious going into this story because people are so excited about one, the psychedelic part of it, and two, the foraging part of it. I think partly fed by the capitalistic model entering this space, combined with policy changes and legalization, combined with social media, and they're freaking beautiful. Like these are like amazing, beautiful beings that are really fun to take pictures of and share. And you can now geotag places. So all of that stuff is just this like wild convergence of interest, just mushrooming, shall we say? But also, just like Erica was saying, when you went out in the woods with Elan, you experienced that. And actually, I was out in the Coast Range as well on an 8-hour mushroom hunt one time with some of the people that Erica talked to as well. And it's so much more is happening than just the collecting of this like thing that you're looking for. And the more that you know the entire ecosystem around it, like the more powerful it is. And I think that's the part that that I hope people are thinking about when they're thinking about mushrooms, is not just like this thing that I can take and eat and it's amazing, or this thing that I can eat and blow my mind. Like that there's also a recognition of like that this thing is part of a larger ecosystem, and these ecosystems are changing, and thinking about it in that like more mycelial way. Because the mushroom part that we focus on so much is just the little sexual fruiting body of this organism that is like always there and hidden from us most of the time. And I think trying to get our heads around that bigger kind of invisible part of what mushrooms and fungi mean, that part is really fascinating to me. So it's kind of like I'm really excited that mushrooms are having a moment, but I'm also hope that people will maybe pick up a issue like Orion and read all these amazing stories by these like so many great writers are in this issue and get a slightly broader version of what they can be in their life.
I really think, yeah, there's part of what you're speaking to is like they're almost popular for the wrong reason. Or it's making me think of going to the Fungi International Film Festival in Portland, and it was at an independent theater, and I'd never seen it more crowded. There were people like sitting in the aisles, and there was just a real pleasure in being in this mushroom cultural space. But when I started talking to people and interviewing them, and like, why are you interested? And it felt like I felt disappointed in some of the answers, which it's not my job to like police why people are interested, but I similarly wanted a deeper understanding rather than just the like, I took a picture of this thing and it's beautiful and kind of cool because it's a trendy
Yeah.
thing, you know? And so, yeah, I don't know. I just really echo and hear what you're saying. I think this issue does such a beautiful job of saying, like, you think you know the mushroom, but wait, it's more
Right.
complex and we need to interrogate that.
Well,
Right.
is there a is there a trajectory for people? Like you say, somebody might come to this film festival or a Facebook page and say, "Look, I've got this pretty mushroom that I found out in the wild, and I identified what it is, and I sautéed it with a little butter, and it was wonderful." They may start out there, but do you feel like do we often find that they go deeper, right? Is the world of mushrooms something that they can open up in more meaningful ways? That's for either of you.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think I think like going to the mushroom festivals and like there were Christian gave multiple presentations. There's so much cool information about them. I mean, Merlin Sheldrake's book Entangled Life was beautiful and it was a bestseller. So it's wonderful that books like that get into the complexity of fungi in all their different ways, like that those are available to people and easily accessible to like learn the much deeper, bigger world around them.
I think there's something also the sort of social side of what Elon, my source, called the Costcoization of wild mushrooms.
Yeah.
Part of this is there's this whole economy and sort of like there's a migrant world of mushroom foragers that many of us don't understand. And she said about 90% of the people you see selling mushrooms in like a farmer's market have not harvested it. It's harvested by largely like Laotian and Latinx workers who are bussed in for a couple days or weeks, and they are working very hard, doing very skilled labor, and then selling these mushrooms. And like, there's a documentary about this called Upon the Mountain that goes into some of the ways that like the Forest Service sort of tries to regulate who can forage on public land. And, in some sense, loggers have more access to public land than foragers. And a lot of that is sort of racism and who are these people, what are they harvesting, so to me, I'm really interested, and I think there has been more attention on like what the trendiness of mushroom, sort of what that actually means socioeconomically and sort of from a human labor perspective. There's this side that when you get your mushrooms at the restaurant, somebody was picking that, and like, do you understand that world? And I think there is starting to be more attention.
So I'm going to turn it back to the stories for a moment. Now, I think, Erica, we already learned your answer to this question when we heard about the fact that you did not eat mushrooms for a full week. But Meera, what was left on the drawing room floor for you in terms of your project? What did it start out as, and how did we end up with what we got?
Yeah. I mean, my very first idea was to walk across the expanse in the Blue Mountains in Eastern Oregon is what they think is the largest organism in the world, which is a mushroom that covers hundreds of square miles, I think. Forget me. I
What
didn't end up
one
doing it.
mushroom does? This
Oh,
single
shoot,
mushroom?
Erica, help me. I'm gonna blank on it.
Yeah, it's the biggest
It,
in the world. Maybe somebody's
uh, uh, uh,
I'm Googling.
Google.
Biggest
these are the
mushroom in the world is actually an enormous underground fungus, the Armillaria ostoyae, also known as the humongous fungus.
Humongous fungus.
Not just the largest mushroom, but the largest known living organism on Earth in the Malheur National Forest in Oregon. There you go.
Yeah, so I talked to some foresters and was trying to figure out if there was a way that I could just basically like walk across the expanse of that. When they come up, they're just honey mushrooms, so they're nothing really spectacular, and you have to be there right at the right time when they're all flushing. And so I was like, well, I'll just walk across the entire expanse. And then it just seemed like that would just be me by myself, just doing something.
Walking on a mushroom.
Yeah, basically taking a long walk in the forest, which would be awesome.
Yeah.
So then I actually reached out to my friend Joe Spivak. I took a mushroom identification class with in like 1996, I think it was. And he is a friend of mine in Oregon, and he is very connected with the Cascade Mycological Society and the whole community, and helps organize some of the mushroom festivals. And so he was very wonderful host to me, and like basically my gatekeeper into that world, and was really generous with introducing me to a lot of people. So I met some people through him, and then just going to the festivals and talking to a whole bunch of people and getting out into the woods as well. So yeah, and the things that got left on the cutting room floor is like, this is the hardest part. So many amazing conversations that I had with so many people, and I really ended up focusing on two that I met in person, and one epidemiologist from Johns Hopkins who focuses on fungi and human health, named Arturo Casadevall, who I just interviewed remotely, but he has this fascinating paper called Disaster Mycologies that I became a little bit obsessed with. So those three people were kind of my main focus. But so the cutting room floor is like, this is the hardest part about doing writing, is you just talk to so many amazing people, and there's so many great stories, and you can only fit them so many in. So yeah, go to my Substack. I did share some of the some of those cutting room floor edits there.
So those answers bring up two questions I want to pursue with you both. And I'm going to start with you, Erica. And, in your article, you're sort of wrestling with the idea of figuring out what a mushroom is and whether it's safe and is that important. And I'm curious where you think now about the idea of mushroom identification within the world of people who are interested in mushrooms. Obviously, it's important, but how should we be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think when you think about fear and mushrooms, it's different than thinking about like fear and I don't know, what's mountain lions, which is this thing that you're walking and it might jump out at you if you're at sunset and you're in a special, the mushroom does not jump out. You invite the mushroom into your mouth. And there are certainly circumstances. There was just this case where a woman fed her in-laws, Australia, right? Was this the case? She fed her in-laws a poisonous mushroom, and 3 of them died, and one of them was hospitalized with a liver transplant, survived. There are cases where we're absorbing mushrooms and we don't know, but very often we are the gatekeepers of our own safety when it comes to them. And I think that was specifically what felt interesting to me, and what feels like, isn't there a really good practice in learning how to identify? And I think early on, talking to Trent and Kristen Blizzard, who Meera talked to, who run the North American Mycological Society, they said the most dangerous mushroom is not like the most dense with poison. It just looks the most like the poisonous mushroom. And that to me felt like a metaphor for many things, where the things that harm us are not inherently the scariest. They just are the closest to what we would welcome in our door, right? And Meera, you have a line in your piece about like, there are many different definitions of catastrophe, or catastrophe depends, right? And in the same way, like, what is a poisonous mushroom? It was interesting to study sort of through indigenous history and across in different places, even currently, certain mushrooms that are poisonous in one culture are not in another. And like, the amanita can be boiled and eaten. And Camille Bromley writes a lot more about this in her piece. But I was so interested studying the ways that like taro or bamboo need to be boiled before eating. So does the amanita mushroom. And there's some recent scholars saying, hey, we don't talk about taro and bamboo as like this terrifying thing that is going to like get you. We just say, here, do your due diligence. And I think it's just interesting thinking about the cultural lenses we have on these things, and why do we have that? And, different cultures have different kind of lawsuit mindsets around who's to blame. And I understand why we don't tell people to go eat these poisonous mushrooms. But, I was also told any poisonous mushroom you can put in your mouth and foragers will like feel it. And nobody wanted to say this on the record, because they were like, we just do not want this in print. Like, we do not advise people to do that. But a really experienced person could. And I had this sense that like the mushroom's so poisonous that if I touch it, I'm going to die. If I put it to my lip, I'm going to die, because I think I just was so scared because of this thing that had happened to me. And yet I have to accept that to be in connection with the foraged foods, I need to be rational about. It's like getting on a plane or, going whitewater kayaking or other things that I ultimately love doing and know are scary.
Right, I'm going to turn to you, Meera, because I think that the idea of disaster mycology is worth exploring a little bit. And you can tell the group a little bit about what it actually is. But for you, I think in your piece, it is also a motif, right? You are visiting this area that has been burned down, and mushrooms are thriving in it. And that I think that's more than just about mushrooms. And I want you to talk about how you think that fits into maybe the bigger project of your writing or your understanding of the environment, or maybe a little bit. And you talk about the pandemic, you talk about the Trump administration. There are a lot of things that come up in the piece that fit under the heading of disaster mycology.
Yeah. I mean, to give Arturo Casadevall credit in terms of coming up with that this is like really going back into deep time where he reaches all the way back to the KT divide to 65 million years ago. A gigantic meteor is believed to have come to wipe out the dinosaurs, and the two main species that rose to prominence after that were mammals and fungi. Like we just took over. And his argument is that we basically coexist really, really well. And part of the disaster mycology is like disasters happen and a big change occurs. It can be good or bad. It could be good and bad depending on who you are. And so, uh, like that big meteor, really bad for dinosaurs, really great for us and fungi. So like looking at these things over big, deep time ranges is part of what he's addressing. But then his argument is that like we partly both rose to prominence because we can coexist so easily. Like fungi don't hurt us. I mean, other than like going out and picking one that you shouldn't be putting in your mouth, like they we get athlete's foot, but we tend to not die from fungal infections, mammals in general. But that has actually been changing, for the past 20 or 30 years. There are new fungal infections that are attacking humans that are killing them. They're appearing in different areas. They think there might be a climate relation to this. So like it could be really, really bad if one wanted to like run with that idea. But it's also like an opportunity. Well, it's an opportunity for the fungi for sure. But there are just changes that are happening within the environment where you're seeing these things emerge. So yeah, so the disaster mycology is like trying to recognize that disasters can cause ruptures and changes. And I think that is a lesson that we should pay attention to. Like we are at a moment of rupture and change because of what's happening with the climate. I mean, just in the past few weeks, how many floods have we had? The fires are already burning all over the West. Like we are seeing landscapes transform. So what are we as humans who want to continue to live on Earth, preferably, going to do to adapt to this like new system? Like, so how can we be like actually be more conscious about thinking about how we're going to do that adaptation to survive?
I think that is a great takeaway from your story and something that I drew from it as well. Before we get into questions, we're going to get there soon. We have a few. The first thing is I just want to make the call out there. If you've got questions, use this Q&A function on the Zoom dashboard, I guess is the right term, and we'll jump in on them once we get to that. But before we do that, I want to do a little sort of mushroom trivia, if we can. Tell me your best fact about mushrooms. What do you got?
The invisibility of them. They're pyrophilous mushrooms that respond to fire. Just like there's trees that are like that are like dependent on them. But I open up the story with these mushrooms that appeared after this devastating fire. And my big question to Christian was like, where the hell were they? Like, where were the mycorrhizal? I mean, I see this as one of the questions, these mycorrhizal networks, which is like the entire underground, or not just underground, they are also in organisms, they're embedded in cells and leaves and everything, that these are uh, organisms that are there for a very long time. Like, who knows how long this mushroom that popped up after a fire in a coastal redwood forest in California, how long that mycelium was there waiting for just the right opportunity to actually fruit. So, like, the idea of patience embodied um, was there. And like he got DNA sampling and he found that the only other one he could match was one that had also emerged after a fire, like all the way in the Smoky Mountains on the East Coast. So like these fire dependent mushrooms being a hint into like this whole other world. I just love that they're just like lurking there, waiting and waiting. Because we usually think, oh, chanterelles, we'll just have to wait till October, till the rains come, and then we'll go out and get the mushroom like every year. But like, no, some are waiting for thousands of years for the right conditions. Who knows?
It makes me think about like mushroom time and the way that thinking about mushrooms change, just in the way that thinking about the humongous fungus changes our sense of like space and what is connected over great distances. There's a way that mushrooms challenge the thinking about time and space. And I would also say, I just love, this is, I mean, this is in the magazine, but the fact that oyster mushrooms in their mycelia will attract roundworms and eat them. And so they're carnivorous and they're like a vegan thing you can eat, hypothetically, but they are themselves eating insects, you know? Or what are roundworms? Are they insects? I don't know enough about them.
Something
Um,
alive.
That's your for your next article.
they're alive.
Worms.
Yeah. And so I think not only is the mushroom making us think more deeply about time, but also like the itness of a mushroom and actually the sort of sentience, right, of these things is just endlessly fascinating.
All right. I think we should take some questions. Take some questions from the audience, and I'm going to go into this Q&A, and I'm going to look at what people had to ask. The first one is from that I could see is from Alexia Pritchard. Like bees or forests, is there any worry about mushroom collapse? And what would that result in? Meaning, what do mushrooms do for our world slash forest slash ecosystems?
Yeah, they're hugely important. I mean, they're hugely important in terms of just it's they believe that like trees could never get as big as they do without the mycelial relationships because there's a whole they're basically extending the root tips of every plant, absorbing nutrients, and then the plant is giving them sugars in response. And so there's this whole mycelial relationship that is so important for like I'm looking out the window at all these big, huge, beautiful trees in Tennessee where I am right now, and like so much of that couldn't happen. And so those if we didn't have fungi doing all of that unseen labor, our world would look really, really different. They're also breaking down organisms, which is hugely important. Like we need those decomposers. We always kind of we always praise the things that are like growing big, and we love food, and we love the things that are growing, but they're just as important as the stuff that's breaking down things down, and fungi are doing that. In terms of them going away, like I feel like it's almost more adaptation of where and them moving. And I think they are able to move in a way that other species cannot. And so in that way, I feel like they will adapt. It's going to be us that have to get used to like certain mushrooms not being in places where we think that they should be because the whole ecosystem has changed beyond recognition to the fungi, and the fungi has left. But there's some evidence that there's really going to be big shifts. I mean, some of the people I talked to just said the heat dome back in 2021 in the Pacific Northwest like fundamentally altered that entire ecosystem, and it will never be the same again.
For mushrooms as well, though, or just overall?
Yeah, I mean, because yeah, see, you're still trying to separate things.
And this is true. This is true.
But yeah,
Uh,
what do you what how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was thinking about 10 things as you were talking. And now I've forgotten the question in the way of this, which was,
I can read you the question. It is
what do mushrooms do? What are the, I mean, I will just say that as a novice, many of the people here probably have done much more foraging than I have. I came into this from a place of fear and not understanding. The sense of abundance in the ways that mushrooms were talked about from foraging. I am so used to feeling like anything foraged is running out or we will quickly deplete. And many of the experts I talked to were just like, there is a sense that there is enough of this thing and it cannot. The more foragers were actually happy to have more people. And I kept waiting. I was so primed for this narrative of like human overreach causing this thing to collapse. And that, Meera, maybe you can speak to more, but that was not there really, and that was very cool. I was like, there's Airbnb does mushroom foraging trips, like surely this is bad for the mushrooms, and they were like, no, we are in an abundance mindset with mushrooms.
Yeah, no, I definitely came across that and felt like that's true. I mean, they always make the parallel. It's like picking the apple from the apple tree. It's not cutting down the tree or taking the branches. Although I did hear numerous people just talking about the impact when you have more and more people tromping around in the forest, especially if they're not being conscious about where they're stepping and the other things that, when they're focused on the mushroom and they're missing all these other things, they can just kind of cause a lot of impact on that level. But no, it's true. You're like picking the apple.
So I want to move on so that we can have a chance to get to as many questions as possible. We did talk about the mycorrhizal network already. I do think before we pass on that maybe this is me and that this is a group of people who know a lot about mushrooms, but maybe you could tell me what the mycorrhizal network is.
Yeah, the mycorrhizal is basically there are filaments that are in this, usually, I mean, we usually think of them in the soil, that are basically they are part of the organism. They are the means for connecting plants, for example, to breaking down nutrients and making them accessible in the soil for the plants. So they are just kind of everywhere. I mean, you can see them. They're like little white filaments of things. And if you're like paying attention and picking up old rotten wood, you'll see all these, you'll see them. And so they call it the mycorrhizal network. And that is basically the majority of what the fungi organism is. I think that's probably the best. Erica, I don't know if you can add anything.
That's great.
Okay.
All right, so let's see this question from Susan Lipman. When you talk about the socioeconomic consideration of mushrooms, can't one expand that to many food sources? It makes me think about the process of being aware and how necessary and difficult that is. Now, Erica, this was you who talked about that. I'm curious if you want to respond to that and add anything to what you had already said.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think absolutely. And if anything, mushrooms, because they're sort of cloaked in this, like you harvest them naturally in the forest. Like I don't think you can't industrialize wild mushroom growing in the way that you can other crops. And so what we often are not understanding is that there is this sort of like quiet industry that's happening on public land of these mushrooms being bought by, say, Costco after being harvested by migrants. And so in a way, this is absolutely true for every food, but I'm thinking about the ways that like orchids have been harvested in publicly. Like there's a number of sort of these stories of things that are wild and they will remain wild. And how do we think about making those things in restaurants that are sort of domesticated by the time we are eating them? It brings up different labor questions, I think, just because it's not happening under a big tent. But I just echo completely what you're saying. It's so true, the process of being aware. And I think if anything, like the mushroom can teach us about the ways that all these things are connected. Like if anything, the mushroom that is collaborating with, the fungi that are in brewing beer, we are relying on mushrooms at every step of the way. Similarly, we are relying on the labor of fungi and also the labor of the people who are bringing those fungi to us, right? And I just think there's a way that thinking about what the mushroom is doing can teach us also about the ways that we in our human networks of interconnection are being.
Okay, so this next one is more of a clarification. It's from Natalie Soleil. Unclear, mushroom that looks the most poisonous is the most poisonous, or is it the one that looks the least poisonous?
This is a tongue twister. So basically it was the mushroom that is the most dangerous is not technically the one that is the most dense with poison. It is just the one that looks most like the mushroom you would eat. So basically the idea is that there's some mushrooms that look like a poisonous mushroom and it's easy to identify as the poisonous mushroom, for example, but the mushrooms that look like the mushroom you would eat. So Maizutake in the Pacific Northwest, for example, There's some fakes or, I'm blanking on the word. There, it's easy to
Lookalikes, yeah.
mistake what you are eating. So I met foragers who were pros who were like, I personally do not forage this mushroom because it looks so much like the poisonous one.
Right, makes sense. This isn't a question. I'm just going to notice that we have someone here from Norway, which is nice. We have a good global reach. So this next one, I recently read this quote, "Patience is fed on hope." It's from Lisa Sadlier Hart. As long, oh, where'd it go? As long as there is hope, there is patience. And when hope is gone, then there is no more patience. We say, I have no more patience. It is finished. How do fungi feed our hope and grow our patience? Now, we covered this a little bit, but I'd like to hear, maybe you could respond to this. And by the way, we've had two comments that Meera, you're not loud
Oh,
enough.
yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot my headphones. Let me just like go really close. Hi. Is that any better? My is that any better on?
For what it's worth, I have not had a hard time hearing you.
Okay.
So hope, patience. We have to be patient for us to get back to this question.
There
So
we go. Oh, oh my gosh, is that better? I hope that's better. I just jacked this up. Sorry about that.
that's okay. Uh,
Patience, yeah, be the fungi. Be the fungi. Be patient and be adaptable. And maybe we will persevere with them.
there you go.
And lean into difference. Again, this is, and sort of
Yeah.
thinking about collaboration in every single field. And I think that is the real grain for me.
Yep, yep, yep. Stop thinking about the divisions and instead think about how we can do it. And also the whole idea, like we've talked about this word panacea and thinking about fungi fixing things. And that with the way that I end my piece is saying like, no, that's not their work. They're teaching us how to do that, but the work of it, that's ours. That's our work.
I like that. So Amy Parrish wants to know, are there other animals, particularly mammals, that regularly eat mushrooms? Are there in a symbiotic relationship with mushrooms, e.g., facilitating their spread in some way, pollinating mushrooms essentially?
They mushrooms propagate by spores, so they're airborne. So actually, you don't need a lot of help in terms of moving them the same way when we think about seeds and cockleburs and all these things that have means of drifting. The spores go everywhere. There's another piece in here in this story. I forget right in the beginning of the issue of someone who decided to cultivate them in their kitchen, and then like the whole kitchen counter is like covered with spores. They really do move quite easily, and so I don't. They have relationships. There are definitely animals that eat mushrooms. You'll see them nibbled on when you're seeing them in the forest, and bugs love them. You miss them at peak time, and they're just covered with bugs and slugs and other critters. So there's relationships there, but I don't think, as far as I know, they are not really dependent on animals in the same way for
I'm
their.
having a flashback to reading The Botany of Desire, the Michael Pollan book, and a mention of goats eating a sort of lichen that is hallucinogenic for them, and they would become sort of drunk, basically. And his point was like, there's dependency from mammals on these things. But I read this years ago, so someone else should fact check that.
All right, so we got 5 more minutes left, so I'm going to try to get at least one or two more questions in. This is from Robert Roy Vanderhook, and he's mentioning all these different kinds of parasites and scavengers out there in the world, along with mushrooms. Parasites dominate the world, and so are fungi parasites or scavengers. And do we need to think positively about parasites?
Hmm.
Huh.
Great framework.
Yeah.
That's a
I
tough.
think, yeah, I mean, yes, and right. I think that they are really complex. I mean, there are ones that are okay. I'm not going to remember the names of the categories, but there are ones that are. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember this. There are ones that are dependent on um, like there's relationships that are symbiotic where both sides are benefiting. There's ones that are more parasitic where they are draining resources, but even parasitic relationships have a role. They have a role within the organisms that are engaged in them. So I don't think they're inherently bad. We need to think more positively about parasites. Yeah, yeah, right. We have parasites living in our bodies that are not lethal. So I think there's a lot. I mean, this definitely comes up with studying anything about mushrooms, is that there is so much we do not know. So much we don't know. And we're learning a lot quickly, and I talk about this, like DNA identification has gone off the charts. Anybody can do it in their garage with the right equipment, but that doesn't tell you anything about how this organism lives in relation to everything that's around it.
Okay, so here's one from Rachel Parker. Do most trees attract fungi? Are there any that are repellent?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, I don't know. Attract is kind of an interesting word to use. I mean, there's usually mycelium and fungal networks around many, many plants. And so, but I don't know of any that repel them exactly. I have never heard of that. And I haven't come across that in any of the research that I did.
We're
Okay.
gonna go need to write an addendum of
Yeah.
the issue with all the follow-up questions.
Here's one from Anandi Premial. I am amazed by the various functions of mushrooms, from being a source of food to medicine to remediation of various contaminants in water and soil. And this is a pretty open-ended one. Is there anything that the mycelial world can't do? Can't make a ham sandwich, as my father would say.
Um,
Maybe?
maybe.
I mean, I think this does go back to the question that they are not the panacea for everything. Like
Yeah.
they are in relationship with us, and we are doing that systemic work. So maybe just like a reframing of that, which is yes, they can do many things, and they cannot solve the problem we are in right now. That is our job.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we are running quickly out of time. I know Neil is going to jump back in a couple of seconds and take over. I just want, from my part, to say thank you, Neil, for having me, and Erica and Meera for doing all the great work here, so that all I had to do is ask you a few questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. This was great. What a great conversation. Well handled, Ted. I love your questions. Meera, Erica, thank you so much for being here and for the great conversation. I wanted to tell everyone who joined, thanks for your questions and bearing with us for a minute of technical glitch in the front end. But this was wonderful. I want to encourage you to check out Meera's and Erica's websites, buy their books. Meera has a Substack that you can check out. Erica, actually, if you're in the Portland area, is going to be at Literary Arts doing another Orion event celebrating this issue and her story and mushrooms in general. So that's next Tuesday at Portland's Literary Arts. You can find information on our website. Please visit thefern.org and orionmagazine.org to learn more about both of our magazines and our work. And please consider supporting environmental storytelling and climate journalism. It's as important now as it's ever been. For Orion, you can subscribe, get a 20% off 1 year subscription with the code FERN. What else? And we recorded this and we'll share it with you afterwards. And so grateful that you all joined us. Thanks to our guests. Thanks, Ted, again. And have a great day, everyone.
I feel
Thanks,
like we are
everyone.
all connected in a mycelial way
Mycelial
now
way.
Yes.
across
Go
the
out, go
country.
forth.
And in Norway, we are, yeah.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.